People think brutal betrayal comes with shattered glass or screaming matches in the rain. They are wrong. The most ruthless destruction happens in silence, wearing a sweet smile and calling you Mom. I watched my own daughter sell my sanity and my entire life to strangers from a window just one street away. Be careful. The scariest monsters do not hide under your bed. They sit right at your breakfast table. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Stella Crawford. I am 42 years old, and until very recently, I was the undisputed master of my own universe. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Ethelgard Dynamics, a premier firm specializing in smart architectural design and high-level security based in Austin, Texas. I built my empire entirely from the ground up, writing the complex code and drafting the intricate blueprints that kept the secrets of massive corporations and paranoid billionaires perfectly safe. I was fiercely independent, brutally logical, and I maintained absolute control over every single aspect of my life. My company designed systems meant to keep external threats out, to fortify physical walls, and to monitor every shadow in the dark. I truly thought I was completely untouchable, but reinforced concrete and encrypted digital firewalls cannot protect you when the total collapse begins from within the delicate tissue of your own mind. The crumbling of my sanity started subtly wrapping around me slowly, like a suffocating cold mist. It began with a sudden violent wave of dizziness during a high-stakes board meeting. The entire room spun off its axis. The voices of my colleagues turned into muffled static, and I had to grip the sharp edge of the mahogany table just to stay upright. Then came the terrifying short-term memory lapses. I would stand in the middle of my pristine custom-built kitchen, completely unable to remember how I got there or where I had placed my phone just 2 seconds prior. Soon the daylight confusion bled into severe nighttime terrors. Mild hallucinations started creeping into the edges of my peripheral vision. I would lay awake and see shadows stretching across my vaulted bedroom ceiling, twisting into unrecognizable, jagged shapes that seemed to breathe. I heard phantom footsteps echoing in the empty, silent hallways of my house. The terror that gripped my chest was not a fear of the unknown, but a paralyzing dread of the deeply familiar. My mother had died of early-onset dementia, a cruel parasitic disease that slowly erased her memory, her vibrant personality, and her dignity piece by agonizing piece. I was utterly convinced the exact same genetic curse had finally come to collect my soul. The fierce, controlling executive vanished into thin air, leaving behind a terrified, broken woman frantically hiding her slipping grip on reality behind locked doors and drawn curtains. That was the exact moment my savior stepped in. My biological daughter Harper was 22 years old. She had recently married a man named Vance, a slick, smooth-talking investment broker whose perfectly tailored suits and bright, practiced smile always felt a little too rehearsed. When they heard whispers of my rapidly declining health, they packed up their sleek downtown apartment and moved directly into my sprawling, smart mansion. "We are here to take care of you, Mom. You should not have to face this dark path alone," Harper had said, sitting on the edge of my mattress and holding my trembling, clammy hands tightly in hers. I wept openly. I was so incredibly moved by her sacrifice and her deep filial piety. My beautiful little girl, whom I had raised single-handedly while building a massive company, had returned to be my shield. Suddenly, my massive echoing house felt like a warm sanctuary again. Harper took over all the domestic duties with the gentle, quiet efficiency of a hospice nurse. She meticulously prepared specialized macrobiotic meals, claiming the raw organic ingredients would clear the heavy toxins from my brain. Every single night, exactly at 9 o'clock, she brewed a special dark cup of herbal tea. She promised the exotic root blends would soothe my frayed nerves and bring me a dreamless, healing sleep. I drank it eagerly, desperate for the temporary peace it provided. Yet despite the meticulously measured food and the endless cups of calming tea, My cognitive state deteriorated at a terrifying, unnatural speed. The mild dizziness morphed into crippling paranoia. The shadows at night no longer just twisted, they began to whisper vile accusations. My mental decline became glaringly obvious and absolutely impossible to hide at Ethelgard Dynamics. During the most critical quarter of the fiscal year, I hallucinated entirely different clauses in a physical document and mistakenly signed the wrong foundational contracts for a massive municipal security project. The error cost the company millions of dollars in immediate penalties. The board of directors, the exact same men and women who used to look at me with absolute awe and unwavering respect, now looked at me with cold pity and barely concealed panic. The pressure mounted daily, finally culminating in a humiliating closed-door emergency meeting where they gently but firmly demanded my immediate resignation. My entire life's work was ruthlessly ripped from my hands. I retreated entirely into the isolated fortress of my home, completely defeated, deeply humiliated, and perpetually exhausted. I became entirely dependent on Harper for my basic survival. She was my only anchor in a dark, terrifying world that was spinning violently out of my control. When the towering stacks of medical bills, complex insurance forms, and daily household expenses became too overwhelming for my foggy, aching brain to process, I did what any desperate, trusting mother would do. I handed over the final keys to my kingdom. I gave my daughter full, unrestricted access to my personal passwords, my private banking accounts, and my platinum credit cards. "Do not worry about a single thing, Mom. I have got it all handled. You just rest," Harper whispered softly. Her eyes filled with what I thought was absolute devotion as she handed me another steaming cup of bitter tea. I closed my heavy eyes, took a long, deep sip of the murky liquid, and silently thanked the universe for blessing me with such a wonderful, loyal child. I drifted off into a heavy, unnatural sleep, completely unaware that the heavy steel jaws of a meticulously laid, merciless trap had just snapped completely shut around my neck. The heavy Texas heat felt like a physical weight pressing down on my fragile shoulders. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, and the glaring sunlight pierced my retinas like tiny, sharp needles. I had managed to shuffle out of my front door to grab the mail, a desperate, pathetic attempt to prove to myself that I could still perform basic human functions. My legs felt like hollow lead pipes. The world tilted violently to the left. The metal mailbox slipped from my sweaty, uncoordinated grip, and the rough concrete driveway rushed up to meet my face. I never hit the ground. Strong, calloused hands gripped my upper arms, hauling me upright with startling mechanical ease. I blinked through the dizzying, nauseating haze and found myself staring into the sharp, intensely observant eyes of Silas Thorne. Silas lived directly across the street from my sprawling property. He was 48 years old, a heavily scarred retired Marine who now ran an elite independent cybersecurity firm. We were not close friends by any stretch of the imagination, but he had always possessed a quiet, intensely watchful presence in our affluent, otherwise superficial neighborhood. "I have got you, Stella. Keep your head down and keep moving," he muttered. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply commanded the situation. Instead of walking me back to my own front door, he forcefully guided me across the blistering asphalt, marching me straight into his house and locking his heavy steel door behind us. His living room was a stark, jarring contrast to my carefully curated, stylish mansion. It was pitch dark, aggressively air-conditioned to a freezing temperature and dominated entirely by multiple glowing computer monitors that hummed with quiet power. Silas pushed me onto a worn leather sofa. He immediately cracked open a brand-new factory-sealed bottle of spring water, breaking the plastic ring right in front of my face, and pressed it into my shaking palms. "Drink this. Drink nothing else from now on," he ordered, his voice low, steady, and utterly deadpan. I took a greedy, desperate gulp, the cold water shocking my dry, swollen throat. "Thank you, Silas. You do not understand. My illness, it is just getting so much worse. The doctor said my brain is failing. My mother had the exact same thing." Silas leaned back against his heavy metal desk, crossing his thick tattooed arms over his chest. "Look at me, Stella. Look straight up into the desk lamp. I frowned in severe confusion, but I tilted my heavy head toward the bright halogen bulb. He leaned in, studying my eyes with a chilling clinical intensity. "Your pupils are completely blown out," he stated flatly, showing absolutely no sympathy. "They look like massive black saucers. They are not reacting to the light at all. I served 2 brutal combat tours overseas, and I have spent the last 10 years tracking underground cyber narcotics rings. I know exactly what early-onset dementia looks like, and I know exactly what heavy synthetic neurostimulants look like. You are high, Stella. You are dangerously, toxically high." I recoiled as if he had physically slapped me across the face. "How dare you? My daughter is nursing me around the clock. She is feeding me strict organic meals. She brews my tea with her own hands. Watch this," Silas interrupted sharply, turning his back to me and facing his massive center monitor. He tapped a few keys with rapid precision. "I have perimeter cameras that sweep the entire street. I built them myself. I noticed you looking like a walking corpse for the past 3 weeks. Then I noticed your slick son-in-law developing a very interesting late-night hobby. The large screen flared to life, showing crisp, high-definition infrared night vision footage. The digital timestamp in the corner read 2 o'clock in the morning. The heavy oak front door of my house opened slowly. Vance slipped out into the humid night wearing dark sweatpants, constantly glancing nervously over his shoulder. He bypassed our large private garbage bins entirely. Instead, he walked briskly down the silent sidewalk to the public storm drain at the far corner of the block. The camera zoomed in digitally, enhancing the grainy image. Vance pulled several small, clear, completely unlabeled glass vials from his deep pockets and dropped them through the heavy metal grate, one by one. He did not do it just once. Silas pulled up 4 different separate video files from 4 different nights. The exact same secretive routine. The exact same unlabeled chemical vials disappearing into the city sewer system. Why would a wealthy investment broker sneak out in the dead of night to dispose of unmarked medical waste in a public drain? Silas asked, his sharp tone slicing right through my rising, suffocating panic. "No," I gasped, clutching the leather cushion so hard my knuckles turned pure white. "No, Vance is just weird about recycling. Harper would never let anyone hurt me. She loves me. You are absolutely crazy, Silas. You are seeing wild conspiracies where there are none." I fought back hot, stinging tears, violently defending the only blood family I had left in this world. But even as the fierce, defensive words left my mouth, a cold, sickening realization began to gnaw relentlessly at the back of my throat. I suddenly remembered the dark, thick herbal tea from the night before. I remembered how aggressively bitter it tasted, hiding a sharp, chemical, metallic tang beneath the heavy layer of organic honey. I remembered how Harper stood directly over me, her eyes totally unblinking, watching my throat move until I swallowed every single poison drop. The solid ground beneath my mental fortress cracked wide open. Silas saw the exact moment the devastating, horrifying doubt finally shattered my wall of denial. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "If I am completely wrong, you lose absolutely nothing. But if I am right, they are going to kill you, Stella. Or worse, they will lock you in a padded room forever while you are still fully conscious. We need hard, undeniable proof. We need to catch them in the act when they think nobody is watching." "How?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a terrifying, ice-cold new clarity. "You are going to tell them you need a long break," Silas said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous tactical brilliance. "Tell your devoted daughter you booked a highly exclusive, 1-week holistic meditation retreat in Florida to heal your fractured mind. You will pack your designer bags. You will hug them both goodbye. You will get into a hired car and drive straight to the airport terminal." I stared at him, completely bewildered by the absurdity of the suggestion. "But if I leave the state for a whole week, how does that possibly help me find the truth?" A grim, entirely humorless smile touched the hard corners of Silas's mouth. "You are not going to Florida, Stella. The driver is a trusted former squadmate of mine. He will take you straight to the airport departures lane, wait exactly 10 minutes, and drive you right back here through the blind rear service alley. I have a secure attic upstairs, completely soundproofed and rigged with military-grade surveillance monitors. You are going to hide in my house, look through my screens, and watch your own home. Let us see exactly what your loving family does the exact second they think the crazy old lady is finally out of the picture. I stood on my own front porch playing the most crucial role of my entire life. I wrapped my arms tightly around Harper, burying my face in her shoulder. I forced my body to tremble violently, squeezing out hot, pathetic tears of genuine-looking fear. "I will be back in exactly 7 days, sweetheart. Thank you for holding down the fort," I sobbed. Harper stroked my hair with agonizing tenderness. Vance stood right behind her, offering a practiced, reassuring nod of absolute support. The black town car waited at the curb. I climbed into the back seat, rolling the tinted window down for one last fragile wave. As the heavy vehicle pulled away, I watched them standing side by side in the rearview mirror until they were swallowed completely by the morning fog. The driver did not utter a single word to me. He drove straight to the departure gate at the International Airport terminal, idled the engine for precisely 10 minutes, and smoothly merged back onto the highway, heading in the exact opposite direction. 3 hours later, I was slipping silently through the rusted chain-link gate of the muddy alley behind Silas Thorne's property. The humid air clung to my skin as I practically crawled up the narrow, creaking wooden stairs to his hidden attic. The space was a sensory deprivation chamber lit only by the cold blue luminescence of 8 massive curved monitors mounted directly to the raw wooden beams. Silas sat in a rolling ergonomic chair, typing furious strings of code across a mechanical keyboard. "Your daughter is incredibly thorough," Silas murmured without looking up from his command prompts. "She manually disconnected the main router and physically destroyed the cloud backup drives for every internal camera. She completely isolated the local network. She thought she blinded the entire house." I stared at the blank screens, a sickening knot twisting in my stomach. "But she forgot exactly who wrote the foundational architecture," I replied, my voice sounding hollow and metallic. "I had personally engineered the Ethelgard residential defense grid. Years ago, I coded a microscopic hardwired backdoor into the physical motherboards of the camera lenses themselves. They ran on a separate localized kinetic battery loop designed specifically to bypass standard internet protocols and transmit emergency bursts through low-frequency radio waves just in case of a catastrophic power failure. It took Silas less than 45 minutes to isolate and ping that hidden frequency. The 8 dark screens flickered wildly, the static tearing apart to reveal crystal-clear high-definition color feeds of my living room, my custom kitchen, and my private corporate study. I pulled up a cold metal folding chair, my wide eyes glued to the glass. For the first 120 minutes, absolutely nothing happened. The house remained dead quiet. Then, exactly 2 hours after my flight supposedly took off for the East Coast, the heavy, solid oak door of my study swung violently open. Harper walked in. The terrified, devoted daughter who had just cried on my shoulder was completely erased from existence. Her posture was rigidly straight, projecting absolute authority. The anxious, downturned curve of her mouth morphed smoothly into a sharp, chilling smirk that sent ice water pumping directly through my veins. She clapped her hands together sharply. Vance scurried into the camera frame, lugging 2 heavy industrial-grade plastic crates that looked like military surplus. "Strip the entire desk," Harper barked, her voice echoing flawlessly through the hidden micro-audio receivers. "I want every single physical ledger scanned. Start decrypting the localized hard drives right now." My beautifully curated sanctuary instantly transformed into a sterile, hostile command center. Vance pulled high-speed optical scanners and heavy mobile server towers out of the black crates. He strung thick black cables aggressively across my imported Persian rugs, hooking them directly into my main terminal. They were not looking for medical records or insurance policies. They were initiating a massive, highly coordinated data breach on my most secure corporate files. The flashing green lights of their rogue data extraction servers reflected ominously off my polished mahogany desk. My breath hitched painfully as the kitchen camera feed suddenly caught my attention. Harper casually strolled out of the study and over to the pristine marble island. She opened a lower cabinet and pulled out the heavy granite mortar and pestle I normally used for grinding fresh culinary spices. From her expensive designer handbag, she retrieved a large, completely unmarked amber prescription bottle. She dumped a massive handful of thick white capsules directly into the stone bowl. I leaned closer to the center monitor, my heart hammering violently against my rib cage. Through the high-definition digital zoom, I recognized the specific geometric scoring and chemical color coding on the pills. They were not holistic herbal vitamins. They were a synthetic, extremely high-dose combination of severe neuroinhibitors and potent hallucinogens. These were heavy chemical restraints drugs strictly used in underground psychiatric lockdown wards to physically incapacitate violently psychotic patients and obliterate short-term memory function. She brought the heavy stone pestle down, ruthlessly crushing the dangerous medication into a fine, chalky powder. She scraped the toxic dust meticulously into a small plastic bag, perfectly prepping it to be seamlessly mixed into my next batch of organic soup or stirred deep into my evening tea. The horrific realization hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. Every single dizzy spell, every terrifying shadow creeping on my bedroom wall, every lost memory, had been meticulously measured, hand-ground, and manually fed to me by the child I had carried in my own womb. I could not breathe. The oxygen seemed to instantly vaporize from the cramped, freezing attic. But the most excruciating visual assault was still waiting for me. I forced my trembling hand to switch the primary feed to my master bedroom. Harper was standing directly in front of my grand vanity mirror. She had carelessly thrown open my hidden velvet-lined wall vault. She picked up the heavy diamond-encrusted heirloom necklace my late grandmother had left me. With a sickeningly casual, entitled motion, she fastened it tightly around her own neck. She leaned intimately into the glass, admiring her stolen reflection, running her fingers over the glittering stones with a look of absolute greedy triumph. A primal, guttural noise built up rapidly in the back of my throat. It was the devastating sound of a mother dying, and something infinitely darker, colder, and purely lethal being born in her place. To keep myself from screaming out loud and destroying the entire covert operation, I grabbed a coarse, heavy mechanical grease towel from Silas's workbench and shoved it forcefully between my teeth. I bit down so hard my jaw popped, and I tasted the sharp, hot, metallic tang of my own blood. I sat there perfectly still in the chilling blue glow of the surveillance monitors, trembling violently in the dark, forced to watch my own flesh and blood parade around happily in the bloody spoils of my meticulously planned destruction. For 72 grueling hours I existed as a ghost, hovering in the freezing artificial blue twilight of Silas Thorne's attic. My muscles cramped, my eyes burned from staring relentlessly at the glowing surveillance feeds, and my heart beat with a dull, hollow rhythm. I watched them live my life. I watched them drink my expensive wine, sleep comfortably in my guest quarters, and systematically strip my digital archives. But the true world-shattering devastation did not arrive until exactly 11 o'clock on the third night. The hidden motion sensors positioned at the edge of my sprawling driveway flashed a harsh, silent red warning across the top center monitor. A sleek, black luxury sedan rolled smoothly to a halt right in front of my massive oak door. 3 men stepped out into the humid Texas night. They were dressed in immaculate custom-tailored suits, but they did not move like typical corporate executives. They moved with the cold, calculated precision of apex predators, each carrying a heavy brushed aluminum briefcase securely locked to their wrists. Vance scrambled frantically to open the front door. He looked incredibly small and pathetic in his wrinkled designer pajamas, his hands visibly shaking as he ushered the strangers into my private living room. I fully expected him to take the lead to play the arrogant, greedy mastermind I always assumed he was. Instead, he instantly shrank into the dark corners of the room, nervously pouring drinks from my crystal decanters. It was Harper who descended the grand, sweeping staircase to greet them. She wore a sharp, crimson silk blouse and black tailored trousers, projecting the exact same ruthless, commanding aura I used to carry into hostile boardroom negotiations. Silas quickly isolated the primary audio feed. filtering out the ambient background noise until their voices echoed perfectly clear through our heavy tactical headphones. "Do you have the extracted files?" the lead man asked, his voice low and utterly devoid of emotion. He placed his heavy briefcase firmly onto my glass coffee table. "I have absolutely everything," Harper replied, her tone dripping with chilling, terrifying confidence. "Every single unreleased line of code, the backdoor access protocols, and the complete, unredacted structural blueprints for Ethelgard Dynamics' entire National Defense Security Corps. You are looking at the foundational architecture that protects over 70% of the domestic military infrastructure. The agreed price is $45 million wired directly into the untraceable offshore accounts I provided, split evenly across 3 separate shell companies." My blood turned to absolute ice. She was not just robbing my personal bank accounts or stealing my jewelry. She was committing massive, catastrophic economic espionage. She was auctioning off highly classified proprietary defense secrets to a brutal rival syndicate. The lead buyer slowly unclasped his briefcase, revealing dense stacks of encrypted digital transfer drives. But he paused, his cold eyes shifting sharply toward Vance, who was cowering helplessly by the wet bar. "And what about him? Can your husband handle the severe legal fallout if the federal authorities start tracking the massive data leak?" Harper threw her head back and let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. It was a cruel, metallic sound that I had never heard in my entire life. She turned to look at the man she had just married, her eyes filled with nothing but absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Vance, please," Harper sneered, waving her hand dismissively as if swatting away a pathetic insect. "Do not worry about my husband. He's just a useful idiot, a glorified errand boy I picked up specifically to play the role of the concerned son-in-law. I needed someone desperate and stupid enough to throw the chemicals in the sewer and carry the heavy servers. He gets exactly 10% of the final payout to keep his mouth shut and disappear." Vance flinched violently, his face turning a sickly shade of pale ash, but he kept his eyes glued firmly to the floor, completely terrified of my daughter. "I have been planning this exact operation for over 14 months, Harper continued, leaning aggressively across the glass table. "It started the exact day my arrogant mother laughed in my face and outright refused to fund my tech startup. I asked for a simple $2 million, a tiny drop in the bucket for her. She told me I lacked vision and needed to work my way up from the bottom, so I decided to take her entire company instead." The second buyer leaned forward, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. "What about the CEO herself? She is a famously ruthless woman. When her mind clears from the drugs, she will hunt you down." "Her mind is never going to clear," Harper stated with a horrifying deadpan finality. "Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock, the trap snaps entirely shut. I am filing an emergency involuntary medical conservatorship. I have meticulously documented 3 solid months of her severe paranoid delusions, aggressive outbursts, and massive corporate failures. I paid a corrupt private psychiatrist $250,000 to sign the final evaluation. The ambulance is already booked. They are going to strap her tightly to a gurney and lock her inside a high-security remote psychiatric facility out in the desert. She will be heavily medicated until the day she finally dies. By the time the ink dries on her commitment papers, I will have total absolute legal control over every single share of Ethelgard." Silence fell heavily over the attic. Silas slowly turned his rolling chair toward me, his hardened eyes watching my face, waiting for the inevitable emotional collapse. He expected the grieving mother to finally shatter into a million irreparable pieces, but the tears never came. The overwhelming, suffocating grief that had been choking me for the past 3 days instantly evaporated. The desperate, unconditionally loving mother inside my chest took one final agonizing breath and died completely. She was executed right there on the cold wooden floorboards, murdered brutally by the sound of her own daughter's cruel laughter. I did not gasp. I did not shake. A profound, unnatural stillness washed over my entire body. I felt my spine straighten vertebra by vertebra until I was sitting perfectly upright in the dark. The terrified, confused victim who had been crying for a week was entirely erased from existence. In her place, a cold, hyper-focused, and utterly merciless architect awoke. The lingering chemical fog in my brain vanished, burned away instantly by a pure, blinding rage. I stared at the digital image of the monster wearing my grandmother's necklace, and I calmly accepted the new reality. She was no longer my child. She was a lethal enemy combatant who had violently breached my perimeter, and it was time to absolutely destroy her. I did not waste a single second wiping away phantom tears. I simply turned to Silas and nodded. He immediately picked up his encrypted satellite phone. We did not call the local police precinct. Local uniforms were entirely unequipped to handle high-level corporate treason and international data smuggling. We called the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the Elite Cyber Terrorism and Economic Espionage Division. Within exactly 2 hours, a senior federal tactical agent and the ruthless head of Ethelgard Dynamics' shadow legal team were sitting around Silas's basement table. They listened to the crystal-clear audio recordings. They watched the damning video feeds of Harper negotiating the sale of national security assets. The federal agent, a hard-eyed man in a crisp, dark suit, looked at me with grim, silent respect. He laid out the harsh reality of the situation. He explained that raiding my house right at that moment would only catch them with copied digital files. Harper was incredibly smart. Her high-priced defense lawyers could easily spin a premature raid claiming Vance acted entirely alone, or that it was a simple, unauthorized corporate backup protocol. To bury her permanently under federal espionage laws and to invalidate the hostile takeover of my company, we needed to catch Harper and her buyers in the exact moment of the physical financial transaction. More importantly, we had to catch her right as she forced my signature on the fraudulent medical conservatorship documents. I had to go back into the lion's den. I had to become the ultimate helpless bait. The next 48 hours were an exercise in absolute, calculated self-destruction. I had to physically and mentally devolve back into the broken, hallucinating woman they fully expected to walk through that front door. I refused to sleep for 2 straight days. I sat rigidly in a hard wooden chair, drinking only minimal drops of water to ensure my skin looked paper-thin, sickly, and deeply dehydrated. I violently rubbed the delicate skin under my eyes until dark, bruised purple circles bloomed naturally. I washed my hair with harsh soap and let it air dry into ragged, greasy tangles. Silas forced me to practice my erratic, shuffling walk across his living room floor over and over again. I rehearsed until my knees ached and my posture perfectly mirrored the exact pathetic slump of a heavily medicated psychiatric patient. I had to master the blank, vacant stare of a woman whose mind was entirely shattered. Every single agonizing hour of preparation hardened my shattered heart into an impenetrable block of solid ice. On Sunday afternoon, exactly 7 days after I supposedly left for my holistic retreat, a hired town car dropped me off in my own sprawling driveway. I stumbled clumsily out of the back seat, clutching my designer luggage with weak, aggressively trembling fingers. Harper and Vance threw open the heavy oak doors. Their faces were plastered with the exact same sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated smiles. "Mom, you are finally home!" Harper cried out, rushing down the concrete steps to embrace me. I went completely limp in her arms, letting my heavy head loll against her shoulder. I muttered nonsensical, confused sentences about the Florida sun being too loud and the shadows talking to me again. Vance practically carried my dead weight into the kitchen, gently lowering me into a padded dining chair. "You look completely exhausted, Mom. The trip was too much for you. Drink this. It is fresh squeezed and it will help you rest." Harper cooed softly. She pressed a tall, freezing glass of thick orange juice directly into my shaking hands. I looked down at the bright orange liquid. I knew exactly what lethal, mind-erasing chemical cocktail was dissolved inside it. I brought the cold glass to my dry, cracked lips and took a massive, eager gulp. The acidic citrus instantly burned my tongue, failing to mask the heavy, bitter, metallic taste of the crushed neuroinhibitors. But I did not swallow. I let my chin drop heavily to my chest in a simulated violent dizzy spell, bringing my long, loose cashmere sweater sleeve up to my mouth to cough. With practiced, flawless sleight of hand, I spat the entire mouthful of poisoned liquid directly into a thick, highly absorbent cotton handkerchief, hidden deep inside my cuff. I repeated the exact same coughing motion 3 separate times until the large glass was perfectly empty. That night, I lay completely motionless in my massive, freezing bed. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, plunging the master bedroom into pitch blackness. My solid door was shut, but I could clearly hear the faint, rhythmic creaking of the hardwood floorboards out in the hallway. Harper was pacing back and forth. She was patrolling the dark corridor like a starving, impatient wolf waiting for its prey to finally expire. My adrenaline surged. My instincts screamed at me to jump up, tear the wooden door open, and wrap my bare hands violently around her treacherous throat. But I forced my rigid muscles to remain completely slack. I carefully regulated my breathing, counting silently from 1 to 10 over and over again, perfectly mimicking the heavy, shallow exhales of a deeply sedated, unconscious victim. I stared blindly at the dark ceiling, my mind as sharp, cold, and lethal as a drawn razor. The trap was meticulously set. The federal net was completely invisible. I just had to survive one last agonizing night and wait patiently for the executioner to walk right into my crosshairs. The harsh morning sunlight pierced through the heavy velvet curtains right at 9 o'clock. The heavy oak door of my master bedroom creaked open. Harper walked in, flanked by 2 strangers. One was a tall, severe-looking man holding a thick leather briefcase. The other wore a pristine white medical coat. Through the crack in the heavy window blinds, I could clearly see the flashing red and white lights of a private ambulance parked aggressively on my front curb. They pulled me forcefully out of bed and dragged me down the grand sweeping staircase into the main living room. Vance was already standing by the glass coffee table, his hands trembling violently. The man with the briefcase, clearly the high-priced lawyer, laid out a thick stack of legal documents. The corrupt psychiatrist clicked a heavy silver pen and placed it right on top of the signature line. The document was a comprehensive, irrevocable medical conservatorship. Harper dropped to her knees right in front of my chair. She grabbed my cold, limp hands and squeezed them tightly. Hot, completely fabricated tears streamed down her flawless cheeks. "Mom, you are very sick. Your mind is completely gone and you are a severe danger to yourself. Please just sign the paper, Mom. I am doing all of this because I absolutely love you." I kept my head slumped forward, letting the silence stretch out agonizingly for 10 long seconds. Then, very slowly, I lifted my chin. I did not look at the lawyer or the doctor. I stared directly into Harper's wide, deceptive eyes. The vacant, drugged haze she expected to see in my gaze was entirely gone. Instead, my eyes were sharp, clear, and as cold as a drawn steel blade. I picked up the heavy silver pen. I did not sign my name. I pressed the dark ink firmly into the crisp white paper and drew one massive, deliberate circle with a sharp, bold cross cutting directly through the center. It was the universal hard-coded digital symbol for access denied across every single EthelGuard dynamic security grid. I dropped the pen onto the glass table. It landed with a sharp, echoing clatter. "No, Harper," I said, my voice steady, powerful and ringing with absolute authority. "The game is over." Before the shock could even register on her pale face, the world outside exploded. The heavy solid oak front doors were violently kicked open, the wood splintering loudly against the marble floor. Simultaneously, the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the back of the house shattered inward, showering the imported Persian rugs in a million glittering diamonds. Silas Thorne marched through the front entrance, leading a highly coordinated, heavily armed tactical strike team of federal agents. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, nobody move!" The lead agent roared, his weapon raised securely. Chaos erupted instantly. The corrupt psychiatrist and the high-priced lawyer were slammed forcefully against the drywall, heavy steel handcuffs clicking sharply around their wrists before they could even utter a single word of protest. Vance let out a pathetic, high-pitched scream and turned to sprint toward the kitchen. A tactical agent tackled him mercilessly to the hardwood floor, driving a heavy combat boot directly into his spine. Harper stumbled backward, her chest heaving in absolute panic. "What are you doing? Get out of my house! My mother is a severely psychotic patient." "She is completely delusional," she shrieked wildly, desperately trying to maintain her web of lies. The lead federal agent did not argue. He simply reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a heavy digital audio device, and hit the play button. The recording blared loudly through the destroyed living room. It was Harper's own cruel, metallic voice from the night before, bragging confidently about selling the classified national defense secrets and laughing about crushing the neuroinhibitors into my food. The color instantly drained from Harper's face, leaving her looking like a terrified, hollow ghost. The undeniable reality of her total destruction finally crushed her. As two federal agents grabbed her arms and wrenched them violently behind her back, her arrogant facade completely shattered. She began to hyperventilate, twisting desperately in their tight grip. "Mom, please!" she wailed, genuine terror finally tearing through her throat. "You have to stop them. I am your daughter. You have to save me." I stood up slowly from the chair. I smoothed the wrinkles out of my dark trousers and carefully adjusted the collar of my silk vest. I walked over to her, my posture perfectly straight, projecting the absolute power of a woman who had just reclaimed her entire empire. I looked down at the screaming, frantic creature thrashing in the federal restraints. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sorrow. Only the clean, cold satisfaction of a perfectly executed defense protocol. I looked at her with the entirely hollow, indifferent eyes of a complete stranger. "My lawyer will see you in federal court," I replied, my voice echoing like ice cracking over a frozen lake. "Do not ever call me Mom again." They dragged her screaming out the shattered front door. I stood in the wreckage of my beautiful, silent house, finally able to breathe the clean, unpoisoned air. 6 months later, I officially sold Ethelgard Dynamics. I transferred the majority voting shares and the massive financial payouts exclusively to the loyal board members and the brilliant engineers who had truly built the company alongside me. I packed 3 small bags, locked the doors of the Austin mansion for the very last time, and never looked back. Today, I drive a sleek, open-top sports car along the winding, sun-drenched coastal highways of California. The ocean wind is warm. My mind is completely sharp, and my body is incredibly healthy. I am entirely free. I learned the hardest, most devastating lesson a woman can ever learn. Loving someone does not mean blindly turning your face away from their cruelty. And sometimes the most magnificent, sweetest revenge in the entire world is simply stripping a ruthless traitor of absolutely everything they stole, walking away from the burning wreckage, and choosing to live a vibrant, brilliant life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support James Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.